Why do you think that porn is so addicting?
Well, there's research that shows that what pornography does to the brain is the same thing as cocaine, like it releases that dopamine. And so when you are watching pornography and you get that dopamine rush, and then maybe you're having another hard day and you start to chase that dopamine rush just as somebody would with cocaine. So studies show that it's actually very addictive in the way that it impacts your brain.
Really?
Mhm.
I guess from a guy's perspective, like a lot of men, I would say typically are the ones that you hear about who are heavily addicted to porn. Like, what do you think porn is giving them that they're lacking in their own lives?
I mean, I've heard so many stories from men. I think that porn can be something where if they faced a lot of rejection in life, they will run to porn because there is no rejection. Because of the dopamine that it releases, it's also something that's they perceive as a great way to alleviate stress, anxiety, and so they'll run to porn rather than running to like healthy coping mechanisms and healing and understanding how to actually manage stress and anxiety, how to heal from rejection. They just run to porn because it gives you that dopamine rush. So it feels like it's something that feels good and it's alleviating you. But in the end, it just creates like it furthers your addictions.
From people who have either reached out to you or your husband, I know you both have a ministry together, and they're saying, like, help, I'm struggling with like porn addiction. Like, what is it that they're struggling with? Are they feeling lonely? Are they depressed? Are they just unhappy in a relationship? Like, typically, like, is the reason, like you said, something from unhealed childhood, or is there some other things going on?
What I see is that it usually does start in childhood. A lot of the men and the women that share their stories, it started with somebody showing them pornography, whether it was a magazine when they were in middle school or high school, a VHS tape. So it all started somewhere. And it was just like something that ignited something in them that then created a desire with them in them to start sneaking around and getting it on their own until it became a full blown addiction. It reminds me of me when I was introduced to cocaine in high school. It was like just a little teeny bump. And it was like, I love that. I got to have more of that because I was a very unhappy child. So I started chasing whatever would make me feel happy. And I see the same thing with a lot of men and women is that there were things in their childhood that were never dealt with and porn made them feel good. So they kept chasing after it the same way that I chased after cocaine.
We live in this world now where everything is like more, I guess, sex positive compared to the way it was years ago. Porn is way more accessible than it used to be. There's OnlyFans, which adds now a human element, connection element to porn that didn't exist years ago. I guess knowing what you know from both sides, like your understanding of the industry as a whole, and then like the work that you do in the ministry, like how can somebody begin to like recover from porn addiction given the excessive stimulus that's coming at them every single day?
Yeah, there's a proverb that I love, and it says that if a bird sees a trap being set, it knows to stay away. I love that so much because we have to recognize what our traps are in life and we have to be wise enough to stay away. So, if you are struggling with pornography and you know that social media is a trap, it's a trigger. You see half naked women on there, you see half naked men. Even with Twitter now, they allow pornography on it. So, you have to be willing to shut down those areas of temptation. You have to stay away from those traps that the enemy is sending to get you to continue watching something that you no longer want to watch. So there's also porn blockers that you can get. There's one with like covenanteyes.com. They have blocker that you can put on your software to block it. Even iPhone, they have like basic blockers nowadays. And then confess to somebody, tell somebody that you need help, like, and that you are struggling and that you need accountability in this area. Don't try to do it alone. And then, I'm big on, I was in the porn industry for 7 years. I was led out of the industry by building a relationship with God. And so if you don't have a relationship with God, I would really encourage you to tap into his strength because like there's no telling what he could do in your life if you would just surrender it to him.
I would imagine that you've gotten a lot of messages throughout the years, both when you were in the industry and out of the industry, from guys that wanted to date you, that wanted to take you out, that I'm sure proposed to you and wanted to marry you. And from your perspective as a woman who's now done a lot of work on yourself and a lot of healing, also very attractive, like what are women looking for? Like how can a man become more desirable to a woman? Because I think about the guy who's like sitting there and being like, all right, like what if I stop watching porn? Like, how do I stop getting rejected?
Confidence. I mean, most men are very visual, women are emotional. Like, women want a man that's confident, that's funny, that they feel secure and safe with, a man that they feel can protect them, somebody that's going to be a great husband and a great father. And so you have good integrity, you are the same person that you pretend to be or that you portray yourself to be on social media. Like, you are that person. You really put your best foot forward every day. I know with my husband, I was looking for a man of character, integrity, somebody who could love me well and lead our family well. And so, yeah, integrity is huge. Don't like approach. There was somebody that reached out to me on Instagram the other day. I posted something about a friend of mine getting married. They're like, "When's it going to be my turn?" I said, "I don't know. You're the man. Why don't you go ask somebody?" And he's like, "Well, I do, but they keep saying no." I'm like, "But that doesn't mean you should give up. Maybe they're just not the right one for you?" And so if you've been rejected 100 times, who's to say the 101th isn't the person that you're supposed to be with? And so just trust the process. And the rejection should make you stronger. It shouldn't make you weaker and more insecure. Yeah, that's just in my way. That's just like God's way of weeding out all the bad ones.
And then what do you say to the opposite, to the woman? Like, because the type of person you are attracted to has changed over the years. Like, I've heard some of the stories you've described, and your like kind of addiction to men, like when you were younger, and now you're married to a pastor, which is kind of like a complete like 180. Like, what do you say to somebody who's listening to this, who's a woman, who's like, I keep attracting the wrong guy. I keep attracting the wrong guy. He's this, he's that. How can somebody change themselves to be able to attract a man of value, integrity, character?
Yeah, I'm a huge believer in if that you subconsciously attract who you are and who you think you deserve. And so if you don't recognize that you deserve better, then you're going to keep settling in relationships. Like whenever my girlfriends come to me and say, "There's no good men out there." I'm like, "No, that's not the problem. You need to work on yourself. You need to grow. You need to heal." So for me, from my experience, where that came from was I started reading the Bible every day. I started praying. I started listening to a lot of podcasts and sermons on YouTube, and I started just filling myself up. I also got a whole new friend group. Like I had to sometimes if you want to grow, you got to leave behind some people that are holding you back. And I had a lot of friends that were holding me back, people that were in the porn industry who I've since reconnected with. But I had to change my number and get rid of all of that. And I had to get a whole new friend group of people who were like minded, who were going in the direction that I wanted to go in.
So take me back. You got into the industry when you were 18. It started, from what I understand, as you had this like addiction, I guess, to men, and you had some stuff going on in your childhood. You worked at a strip club. Like, how did you go from that to getting in the industry? Like, what do you think went wrong?
Well, I mean, I just went through a lot as a child where I felt very rejected in life. And so I just started looking for love in all the wrong places. And the guy that I lost my virginity to cheated on me with 3 different women. And so it was like I faced more rejection that day. And I kind of was just searching for anything to make me feel better. And my friends and I went out to Mexico. And it was the first time that I ever remember getting drunk. And I went outside to get some food and I saw this other club and I ended up going in there and it was a strip club. And the bouncers, I was only 16. I had blonde hair and braces. I looked like a little girl and they throw me up on stage and I'm just kind of like looking around at what the other dancers are doing. And so I took my top off that day, but from the stage, the people that were watching, men and women, were like, "Oh, you're beautiful. We love you," and they're giving me money. And that kind of, for me, started to fill a void that was in my heart. I was searching for affirmation because I didn't get that at home. I was searching for validation because I didn't feel validated at home. And so that kind of like planted that seed in me that day. And then fast forward as I'm in college and I start becoming pretty promiscuous because I was just a broken girl looking for attention. And I end up in the strip club. A couple producers came in one night when I was working and they said, "We love you. You are going to be such a star. We make romance movies. If you're ever interested, give us a call. We'll be in LA." And I happened to be in Los Angeles the next day. So I gave them a call and they showed me their porn set, put me in hair and makeup, and took some photos of me and sent me over to my agency. And I was in that industry for a total of 7 years after that.
What was life like in the agency? I mean, I know there was drug addiction and stuff coupled in there. I know you had a pimp at one time. Go into as much depth as you can as to like what the day-to-day was like.
Well, when I first got in the industry, everything was like new and exciting. And I'm like, oh, I love this. Like a month in, I caught gonorrhea. And that was the first time I had ever got an STD. And my agent was like, oh, don't worry. Everyone gets it. It's just a shot in the butt. You'll be fine. And that kind of like traumatized me a little bit. But I went along with it. At this point, I just already started creating all these lies in my head of like, this is you've made your bed and now you have to lie in it, like no pun intended. But I really felt like I was stuck after only a month. And so from there, I had a director tell me that I was fat and I need to lose weight. And I was not fat and I did not need to lose weight. So I hit up a girl that I felt like had some drugs, and I was like, "Hey, can you get me some coke?" And she got me cocaine, and I started using it pretty quickly and just started using it every single day. And then from there, I met somebody that had pills and gave me pills. So I just like I honestly don't think that I was sober like very like I probably could count on my hands the amount of days I was sober once I started using drugs in that business. And so yeah, it was a toxic industry. I started working when I got in. I was 18 years old and I started working every single day in that business because I was 18. They really played on the like the young girl and the old man kind of thing, giving the illusion of a, like pedophiles, which was really sick. And they put me in like pigtails and schoolgirl uniforms and like this costume jewelry and have you say, "Oh, I'm only 18," but like it's the kind of jewelry that like my 4-year-old daughter would wear. It's not like they really try to make you look really young. I just remember getting to a point where I told my agent, like, I was not a woman of conviction. And I just told him, hey, like, I can't do these kinds of shoots anymore because I feel like these kinds of scenes are going to make people want to go and like molest little girls. And he's like, no, that would never happen. And I'm like, no, I just don't want to do this kind of stuff anymore. And so I started like getting tattoos on my body to try to avoid getting that work. Eventually, I got implants and just like I just wanted to get out of that teeny bopper stuff because it was so disgusting to me. I ended up at like 3 years of being in that business. At that point, I was using heroin and I couldn't get a hold of any drugs. My dealer was like out. And so I just like called my grandma because I was withdrawing and I'm like, I just think I'm going to kill myself. Like, I don't know if anybody that's listening has ever had to go through withdrawals from heroin, but it is awful. You feel like you are dying. And so my grandma came and picked me up and I finished detoxing at her house. I got a hold of some Suboxone from a doctor to kind of help with the process. Didn't help too much, but a little bit. From there, I met a guy who I quickly started dating because men were my weakness. I didn't know how to be alone. And he was in a motorcycle gang. And he was stabbed to death by the like opposing motorcycle gang in the area. And he was stabbed in front of me. So I'm like, have nowhere to go at this point. And his friend, who he had introduced me to, came around and was like, oh, I can help you. Like, I'll get you a hotel room because they wouldn't let me go stay at our apartment. And I was like, okay, thanks. So he got me a hotel room. And I'm thinking, oh, he's just trying to like be a friend because that was his friend, but he was a pimp. And he got me back into the industry. And I was in there for another 3 to 3.5 years after that. And this time, all my money was going to a pimp.
So when you say a pimp, were you like having sex with people outside of the scenes?
Yes. I mean, the money that I was making from the scenes was going to him. And then I was also doing escorting. I had always done escorting, but this time around, he had me on like just like really low end, like I don't even know if it's still around, but like Backpage and stuff like that, which was like Craigslist, which was really humiliating, to be honest.
Got it, got it. So like he was different than your agent, right?
Yes.
So like as you know, I had Lisa Ann on the podcast. We went deep into her story, and it seemed like from what I understood, obviously she had some stuff in her childhood as well, but she really got into the business because of the money. And she was like, I can make this like a business. She was straight like business with it. Would you say that the main reason that you got and stayed in it was just for from a validation like searching for love in all the wrong places reason, or did you also see like potential with the money?
When I first got in, I thought, okay, I could make money. But I was actually at that point when I was in college, I was making more money per night at the strip club. I was making $2,500 a night at the strip club in Santa Barbara where I was going to school. In porn, I was only making like 900 a scene. So for to do a guy, and like I think it was like 800 for a girl, and that was like my starting rate. So it went up from there, but for me, it wasn't necessarily about the money. I think that honestly, I had such a void in my heart and just wanted attention so bad. And I thought, like, oh, if, when these guys promised me fame, it was like they knew exactly what to say to me. Like, you're going to be famous. And for me, I was like, oh, everybody's going to know my name. And I didn't care that it was like pornography. I was so broken that I didn't even think, like, yeah, like, but they're going to know your name for being a porn star. Like there's no achievement, there's no reward in that. But I didn't think all that through. I was 18 years old. So I was like, oh, okay, yeah, like I'll do it. So mine was more for validation. Lisa definitely used the industry in a much better way than I did. And I admire her for that. I told her the other day, I was like, if only I would have not been a drug addict and I could have had some of my money when I left the business because I left with my last $1,500. That's it. And I was like, my net worth is like, I don't know, they said in that business $3.2 million or something to that nature. But I left with $1,500 and that's it. 7 years of my life.
So you kind of touched on, you watched your boyfriend get like fatally stabbed, and then you kind of were left with nothing. Like, how did you process all that? Did things get worse with your addiction? Like, how did things go after that?
After he was stabbed, I kind of started using crystal meth for a little while. I had gotten brought into what do they call it? Kind of like the witness protection program, but it was only for a few days because they couldn't find the murderers. And so they put me in a hotel room, and there was actually a Bible in the hotel room. And so I remember taking that Bible with me, and they would take me from the hotel to the police station each day for several hours. And I would just sit in a room pretty much alone, and they'd come in and question me from time to time. But I would just sit there, and like in the Bible, it said like anxiety, grief, loss, like just all these things that you could be going through. And then you flip to the page to read scriptures about those specific topics, and I had my pen and my paper, and I would just start writing down every scripture that spoke to me. And so I kind of started to find strength in that way. I noticed that I was getting like comforted from that. That didn't last very long. They sent me back off after a few days. So, but that was kind of where I was finding strength in that season. But to be really honest, I lived with a lot of fear for many years. And because it took them over a year to find the murderers, and then it took them years to come to like an agreement. I think I don't know what all the terminology is called, but when they before they go to trial, you can like settle. What is that called?
Plea, like a plea bargain?
Yeah, they ended up doing a plea, but it took years for all that to happen. So until that happened, I had lived in like a lot of fear. Like I would look over my back, and even now when I go and eat at a restaurant, because when they came in, my back was towards the door. To this day, I will not sit with my back towards the door. Like I'm just, I'm very alert and very aware of my surroundings, especially now having children too. It's like it opened up even more. I'm like always like, what could happen?
It seems from your story that you were always in the midst of this kind of searching, right? You talked about finding a Bible. You talked, you went to the Rock Church, I think like a few years into your career, and like we're listening to sermons, but always kind of got tugged out of that back into the industry, throughout your career. Like, were there times in your career where you were just like, man, I got to get out of this. This is not good for me. Or were you like fully like sucked into the trap of all the validation and attention you were getting?
No, after a year and a half, I desperately wanted out. But like I said, after about even just a month being in the business, I started creating these lies of like, how could I ever leave this business? I would see news stories of teachers that got caught like posting lingerie photos online and they got fired. So I'm like, if these teachers are getting fired for lingerie photos, like I'm never going to find a job because I've done a lot more than lingerie photos. So I just honestly, even though I hated the business after about a year and a half, and I wanted out so bad, I didn't think that I could get out. I didn't think that I would ever have a life outside of the industry. So it took me hitting like just massive rock bottom for me to realize, like, you know what, I don't even care. Like, I'm gonna just by faith it.
And then what was the breaking point for you? What made you finally like walk away from the industry for good?
I was with the pimp, and towards the end of our relationship, there was a guy who faked a test. Like every 28 days was the protocol that you had to get tested for gonorrhea, chlamydia, and HIV and syphilis. Well, he changed his test to say that he was negative for syphilis, but he was actually positive. And so they were telling everybody, oh, just take this antibiotic or something, and like you won't catch it. And I'm like, but how do you guys know? Like, you guys are using us as guinea pigs. So I refused to shoot. And then from there, so I had already taken it several months off because I was like, I'm not going to shoot and run the risk of catching syphilis. And then from there, we got in a fight, and I just felt like, okay, this is it. Like, I need to leave this guy. And so I called my mom and I asked her to come and help me. And she showed up within like 15 to 20 minutes, and she helped me to get away from this guy. And then from there, I'm like, okay, now I have no money. I had actually stashed, because I was doing escorting jobs. I had stashed $10,000. So I was able to buy a $5,000 beat up old school Mercedes on Craigslist. And I paid off an eviction and got an apartment. And then I was broke again. So I had to go shoot porn scene. And I brought my Bible on that airplane, and I'm reading a verse in Revelation, and there's a verse that really stood out to me, and it really brought a lot of conviction to me. And then from there, I just felt God telling me, like, Brittany, this isn't the life that I have for you. The life that I have for you will overflow with so much love, peace, and joy. And if you would just quit this business today, I would bless your life like no man ever could. And here I am, like, feeling really hopeless, feeling like I'm starting all over again in life, having to start from ground zero in the porn industry, which I hated. And it was like that day from reading the Bible, I had hope and I had faith that God could transform my life. And so I quit porn that day and I started going to church, and I just really started my journey to healing. I quit dating guys. I took a year off of dating, and every day, like, I was just seeking God and like seeking healing and spending time in his presence. And he really did transform my life.
And what about the drugs? How'd you kick that?
Yeah, that was a miracle because I was one day reading my Bible and I felt like God was talking to me saying, you go flush your drugs down the toilet. At this point, I was on like Oxycontin and Adderall and Xanax. And he's like, okay, go flush them. And I'm like, okay. Like, at first, I was kind of going back and forth, like, no, I'm going to get sick. I can't do this. And then I just finally went and did it because the conviction was so strong, but I only flushed all but four. And I felt like victorious. I was cheering myself on, like, you go, girl, you did it. And I went back to my Bible and I just felt like that conviction again of like, no, like, flush them all down the toilet. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to get sick. Like, I can't do this. And I just felt like this like wave like of God's presence come on me and is like, you're not going to get sick. And I'm like, okay, well, and then I reasoned, oh, well, I guess I could just go back to the doctor. Let me just try this by faith. So I flush the other four down the toilet and I wait all day. I don't feel anything. The next morning I wake up assuming that I'm going to feel like a stomach ache or something. I felt nothing. I took my dog out for a walk and it was like this weight had been lifted off of my shoulders. So not only did I flush my drugs down the toilet, but I felt like in that moment too, like I was getting free from depression, anxiety, all of the things that I was trying to use drugs to numb the pain. It all just left. Like, it was a miracle. There's no other way to explain it.
Talk about the collateral damage. What has been a lot of the stuff that you've had to like unpack and unwind from leaving the industry, watching somebody get murdered, your childhood, addiction, like talk about the problems that all presented.
Yeah, so I went through a lot of healing that first year really, and I thought that I was totally healed. I mean, I had to go through just not trusting, especially not trusting women. I'd never really had solid friendships in my life. So I'll never forget the time I felt like I needed to start a women's Bible study. And I was like, I'm not gonna, but it was so healing and so great for me because I never trusted women. I was verbally abused by my mother growing up, and then, had a really bad encounters with just women in life. So that was one thing. And then just learning like coping mechanisms, like, hey, just because you feel uncomfortable, it doesn't mean that you have to run to pills. It doesn't mean that you have to run to alcohol. Like, you can feel uncomfortable, you can sit with that, and you can overcome that. And you actually feel better when you process and you overcome it than you do if you run and numb the pain. So it was that. It was the validation from people. I remember having a moment where I'd been going to church for probably 5 or 6 months at this point, and just feeling like, wow, when I was in porn, like every single day, I would have hundreds of thousands of people online on social media telling me how beautiful I was and how much they loved me. And here I am going to church, and I have not heard the words "you're beautiful" in probably 6 or 7 months. And I'm like crying out to God about this. And I just felt in that moment like, hey, sometimes if there's things that God wants to heal you of, He will deprive you of the very thing that you're using to fill the void so that He can fill it. And so that's what He did with me. Like, I was deprived of affirmation, and I had to learn that no matter what anybody says or doesn't say, like, it's not going to make me less valuable or less worthy. Like, I'm still fully validated, accepted, and loved, and it doesn't matter if anybody else ever says that or not. Like, it had to come from within. So there was that. And then after like having kids, it was a whole nother layer of healing. I thought I was totally healed. And then I started having children, and I'm like, oh, great. Here's some triggers coming up, the tantrums and things like that, where I would notice that I would get really anxious when my daughter started having tantrums. And so I learned that because, growing up, it was like we weren't allowed to have tantrums. We weren't allowed to cry. We weren't really allowed to make mistakes. And so when my daughters would do these things, it brought up like these old layers of things that hadn't been healed yet, that I had to keep bringing back to God. And every now and again, it still triggers me. And I just honestly sneak off to the bathroom and I pray, like, God, I need your peace right now. I need your strength. Help me to love my children the same way that you love me. So there was a lot of healing. And, it's proven that it's still coming up from time to time.
I'm also a Christian, and I know that God has done a lot of work in my own life and helped me heal from a lot of things. I also know that I've had to do a lot of work myself in the way I talk to myself, the way I built relationships, the way I live my day to day life in order to complement all that stuff and build like a solid foundation. And obviously, I'm not perfect, but I've had to really do a lot of work there. You mentioned that you were getting this massive influx of compliments and validation from people on the internet. And I think people struggle with that to a certain extent now, given how active people are on social media and things like that. What were some of the other things that helped you or continue to help you kind of continue to validate yourself so that that emptiness doesn't come back again?
Yeah, I mean, I love what you said about like your self-talk. Like, your self-talk does have to change. I did go through a process of like when thoughts would come in, whether they're fears or insecurities or just thoughts that don't make me feel good, that I don't want to think about. Like, I kind of process where it's coming from. I have a friend that's a therapist that tells me, you got to ask yourself, is this truth or trauma? And it's such a good question in the heat of the moment to ask yourself, like, hey, is this my trauma coming up, or is this really the truth? And most of the time, it's trauma. And so you can release that, and then you can replace the lies with the truth. And so I do a lot of like, if there's times where I'm having a bad day, I will look myself in the mirror and I will encourage myself. And I use scripture to do it. So I like look at myself in the mirror and I'm just like, you are a woman of God. You are worthy of real true love. I tell myself, God's working all things together for good. And like, I just start speaking His word over myself. And every time that I do that, it fires me up where I'm like, okay, I got this. Life's not so bad. But it's like something about looking yourself in the mirror and like telling yourself, even like pointing at yourself, like it's a game changer.
Speaking of validation, I want to talk about like romantic relationships. Obviously, you're married to a pastor, and I want to get into that a little bit in a few minutes. But like first, like just from an outside view, I imagine there had to have been some intimacy stuff that you had to work through, given that in your not only just your career, but you mentioned that you were an escort. You like were constantly getting this massive influx of attention from men, like all day, every day, essentially. Like what issues presented themselves when it came to intimacy and romantic relationships following leaving that industry?
One thing that I did when I became a Christian, I kind of heard, like, different pastors talking about how they saved their one pastor in particular said he saved himself for marriage, and he had his wife on stage, and they were talking about that, and it was like, for me, I felt like, "Wow, like, maybe this is the way for me." Like, I've never tried this before. I've always slept with people, like, when I would date somebody, I mean, we were sleeping together usually on the first or second date, like, we did not wait. So I'm like, maybe there's some, like, validity to this. So I made a commitment that I was going to stay celibate until my wedding night, and my husband was actually already practicing the same thing. We both had sexual partners outside of that, but when we got together, we both already had that conviction. He'd already been doing it for a couple years before me. It was about 3 years of having no sex, when before that I was having sex almost every single day. Yeah, I mean, I think that that alone was really healing for me, because on our wedding night, like, I remember just being so nervous. Like, it had felt like I had not ever had sex. Like, I was just like, I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. Like, this is so awkward.
Really?
It had been 3 years. Like, I'm not joking. Like, I was like telling my friends, like, dude, I'm so nervous. Like, it had been 3 years without having sex. So, it was, yeah, and I don't know, I think that there's something to, like, just celibacy, like, when you have a very promiscuous past and then you give yourself some time to heal and then you don't do that anymore, like, it's just I don't know, I guess it's like, riding a bike, you don't ever actually forget, but when you get back on, it's you might fall a couple times.
You got to put the training wheels on again, I guess, right?
Exactly.
um, so, how did you end up marrying a pastor? Like, how did that even happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's a crazy story. So, when I started going to church, men were my weakness still. I hadn't been healed yet. And I started dating a guy that brought me to that church that I was at. It was called Cornerstone Church back in the day. They changed their name. I was there and I went to a young adult service, and the preacher was preaching and he was just talking. He's like, I have a word for the women right now. Like, ladies, I just want you to know that you are a woman of God and that you are worthy of real true love. And if your man is not treating you as a woman of God, he needs to step up or step out, show him the exit sign, because you are worthy of real true love and you're worth the wait. And when he said that, I just kind of like my life started to flash before my eyes. And I'm like, well, I received that word. Like, I felt like it was just for me. I'm like, I am a woman of God. I am worth the wait. And here's this guy. He wants to have sex outside of marriage. I'm looking for a job. And he's telling me that I should go work at the strip club. Like, what kind of man is this? Like, I don't want to be with him. So I broke up with him. And that was when when I made a promise to myself and to God to stay single for a year. And then over that year, I started serving in that young adult ministry. And I just really started to catch feelings for my husband. He's now my husband. And I didn't tell anybody about it. I just kind of like let it sit. I talked to people that didn't go to our church about it, like my sister, she knew, my mom knew. But other than that, like I just kind of kept it to myself. And there was a day, like it was about 2 years after I started going to that church, almost 2 years later, he asked me out on a date. And the rest is history.
A lot of people, they struggle with baggage, right? They have a lot of stuff that they're ashamed of from their past, whether it be past relationships or just past mistakes or the way they behaved in relationships or childhood, divorce, and they're afraid of like taking that step into a healthy relationship or pursuing a person that they actually like given their previous history and stuff they've done in the past. And I guess I don't want to I mean this in the most loving way possible. I mean, like, you had a lot of stuff that you were bringing to the table from your past that I'm sure there was some level of shame. So I guess where I'm going with this is like, how did you carry it in a way where you were confident enough with it and then also like aware of it to not let it like get in the way of you like taking that step and like marrying this guy of your dreams?
So the first step is honestly was my relationship with God because I did have a lot of shame. When I first started going to church, I looked around like everybody here is so perfect. Like nobody would ever accept me. If they found out what I've done, like they're going to kick me out of this place. So when people would ask me like, "Oh, what's your testimony?" And I'm like, cuz sometimes like they'll ask you random questions like that, people you barely know. And I'm like, oh, I've just been a receptionist, just kind of stumbled on the church, my friend brought me and like I lied because I was so ashamed. I didn't want them to know that I'd done porn. Well, little did I know that there were people that were at that church that watched porn and, I got found out. Before that happened, I shared my testimony with a organization who used to go to porn conventions to talk to porn stars. Like they would give them Bibles and stuff. And I knew them from when I was in porn. So they're like, "Can you share your story with us?" And I thought they were just going to play it for the conventions. And they put it on YouTube. And within like a few days, it had millions of views. And I was mortified. And at that point, I just started praying. And I'm like, I'm so embarrassed, God. Like everybody at church is going to find out what I've done. And like, I don't think I can go to this church anymore. I just need to leave. And I just felt like God saying, like, "Brittni, can you picture Jesus on the cross?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Can you picture the crown of thorns in his head, the nails in his hands, his feet?" And I'm like, "Yes." And he said, "Was that enough for you?" And I said, "Well, yeah, that was more than enough for me." And he said, "Then why are you ashamed of the very thing that Jesus died for? Now go and be set free." And in that moment, I felt yet another weight of shame get lifted off of me to the point where I'm like, "You're right." Like it's kind of like mocking the cross. Like Jesus died for the fact that I was a porn star, a prostitute, all my sin, all of our sins. He died for that. And so for me to sit and live in shame, it's like, for what? He died for it, And if God says I'm forgiven, then I don't care what anybody else thinks. I don't care if they judge me. I don't care if they criticize me. I don't care if they deem me unforgivable because God says that I'm forgiven. And so I went to church the next day or a couple days later and I just started telling everybody, "God's so good. I used to be a porn star and a drug addict, but he set me free." And I just started telling everybody my testimony. And I just from that point forward, like just from that encounter with God, decided that I was no longer going to live in shame.
What have been some of the things that have come up like in your relationship with your husband that you've had to work on?
It started once I started having kids. So I feel like we had like honestly, this is not like it's if people are like, "Really?" I'm like, we've had like the perfect marriage until we started having children. And then when we started having children, all those old little traumas started coming out and I've realized that I have a hard time when there's a lot going on externally because my household growing up was so chaotic. If there's an interruption in my schedule or, something doesn't go as planned and all the ducks don't stay in the perfect row that they need to be in, then I start to get like a little bit of anxiety on the inside. And then that manifests in my emotions. So maybe I'm not as kind, I'm impatient, maybe I use a tone that I shouldn't use. And so that's what I've been going through for healing, like the past probably few months since I've realized that it's kind of become something that's been more common over the last several years. And so, yeah, so I was talking to my friend who's a therapist, and she was telling me, like, "You're so concerned with everything being right externally, but God is more concerned with things being right internally." And so that's what I'm learning is like, hey, if there's an interruption in your schedule, like, it's okay. And so lately, like, I mean, we got some bad news this morning, and pre going through this healing, I probably would have let it freak me out quite a bit, but I sat there and I felt the freak out starting to come on the inside. And I just took a deep breath and I said, "No, God's got this. Everything's going to be okay." And then several hours later, I ended up getting a call and God had it and everything ended up being okay. So, but like I could have spent hours worrying about something that was never even going to come to pass. And so, yeah, that's probably the biggest thing is that as we've added more to our plate, I've had to deal with learning that, like, because I felt like life was easy, like just being married and being a housewife, and then adding children to the mix and doing ministry, like that became more like there's more pressure. And if you didn't grow up learning healthy coping mechanisms and pressure. Like for me, I want to run when pressure comes because I was always getting yelled at, barked at, where it's like, I don't want to, it reminds me of my childhood. So yeah, that's probably the biggest thing that I've had to go through lately that I've been healing from. And I think that that's the biggest thing that's come up in our marriage personally.
We've talked about like your addiction, I guess, to external validation and how that like led you down this, I guess, horrific path into the industry and then all the twists and turns that came along with that. There's a lot of people that struggle with that now that are trying to find themselves. They're on the internet and they're comparing themselves to people they're following. They're comparing themselves to their friends, their family. Like, what do you tell somebody that is just having a hard time right now with feeling like loved and valued for who they are?
Comparison isn't going to make you feel any more loved or any more valued. We have to learn to take our eyes off of others because we're never going to amount to somebody else. Why? Because you weren't created to be that person. You were created to be you. And so, really learning to heal and like finding the root of like, why don't you feel validated? And it's like we said, is it truth or trauma? Like, is it because your parents didn't affirm you? Is it because you were abused as a child? Is it because maybe you were madly in love and married to somebody and they walked out on you or cheated on you? Like, where is that coming from that you don't feel like you are good enough? And then once you see that root, you can begin to heal that place and then you can start to learn to love yourself again. But the worst thing that you can do in those moments is compare yourself to other people because all it's going to do is make you feel worse about yourself. So you just got to keep your eyes on God and stay focused on the things that he has for you in your life and heal those areas, and I think everything's going to be okay for you.
Speaking of healing, what's the relationship with your family like now?
It's great. It's great. It took a couple years to get there. It took a lot of setting very, very tight and very clear boundaries because I've learned that if something's triggering you, set a boundary around it until you get really healed. And so, yeah, it took a lot of boundary setting, but we're great now. I mean, I was just down visiting my family a couple weeks ago, trying to make plans to go visit them again before summer break is over. So, yeah, I mean, things are really good.
That's awesome. We were talking off camera about how much the industry has changed and that it wasn't as extreme and as toxic it is now compared to like 20 years ago. Like, why do you think that things like porn, OnlyFans, and the like are just destroying people's lives so much now?
I mean, don't you feel like everything's kind of gotten progressively worse? Like, it always starts somewhere, right? It starts small. So, we were talking about it's with the Blockbuster, you had to go and actually rent your video, or you had to like be very sneaky to get a magazine, or, it was like it started there. Same with, I remember reading through, I did a report on Marilyn Monroe when I was in like middle school or high school. And I read that when she posed with a one piece bathing suit, it like caused ruckus all over the world. Like, how dare she wear a one piece bathing suit and take a photo in it? How dare she, And now, I mean, you see women walking around just outside during summer with white shirts on and no bras and crop tops and super short shorts. It's like everything has just gotten progressively worse. And I think that when we allow something into our lives that goes against our moral convictions, eventually it becomes normal in our life. And then we have to get further and further into things because the more we normalize things that go against our moral conviction, the easier it is to then go on to the next thing. So it was like a one piece bathing suit. And now it's like no big deal that women are barely wearing any clothes in the gym or outside during summer.
But how has the industry changed?
Oh, how's the industry changed? Well, speaking from, I mean, from when I was in the business or like from when Lisa was in it or back in the day?
What I understand now is it's just like you could literally just watch porn like on just random sites for free, and you didn't. I mean, the barrier to entry is just so small now compared to what it used to be. Like you kind of hinted at, like you had to like walk into this video store like super ashamed because when you walk in there, people know what you're in there for, and you go behind the curtain and you walk out with like a bag, like a black bag, and it's so nobody can see what you just bought. And now, like you could just sit in your room and at home all day and just literally watch porn all day, and nobody would know what you're looking at, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's gotten progressively worse. Even when I was in the business, I think Pornhub had just started towards the very end. Like I left the industry in 2012. And so I think that was just right around the time Pornhub was getting started, if I'm not mistaken. And so, yeah, there's been like a massive shift in the business where people aren't just buying DVDs, they're going on the internet, but it's like Pornhub gives them free access. And now Twitter, X, they go by X, like X has gone X rated. You can now post adult, I mean, there's always been adult content on X, but there were no rules against it. But now Elon Musk has put out a statement saying that they will just allow it. So the only way to not see it is if you go in and change your settings, or if you're supposedly if you're under 18, but anybody can say that they're 18 years old. They don't have any age verification system going on. And so, a 12-year-old can go on X and just say, "Hey, I'm 18, I was born in 1967, and really they were born in 2012, and they have access to it." And so, yeah, the industry has changed tremendously. It's completely normalized. People can do whatever they want. Me and my husband, we've had people that we've kept accountable through porn software. They've asked us to be their accountability partners. And there are like people that will spend hours. Like my husband was a while back keeping someone accountable, and the guy had spent like between 8 and 13 hours, like one day, 8 hours on a weekend, and then 13 hours the following day on just watching porn, like literally all day long. So it's a problem. It's a real problem.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with what's going on with Twitter, but I do know that. I mean, aside from that, I think the accessibility is just so simple. I mean, a kid could just easily go on their parents' computer and just search for something and just say that they're 18, or whatever, right? And I also just think there's this. I mean, we hear so many people talk about this loneliness epidemic that we're in, and then I just think people are feeling inherently lonely, lacking meaning, lacking purpose, and they're looking for something to fill that void. And porn and OnlyFans and things like that create this easy access to connection with other people that they don't have to feel as lonely anymore. I mean, I look at the way OnlyFans has evolved, and again, no judgment to people who do that at all, but it's like, I think a fact is a fact that I can see how it would create more problems with like men, because now they're getting to interact with somebody that they're more than likely never going to meet in person.
Yeah, but here's the deal. Most of the time, they're not actually interacting with that person. A lot of these women that are on OnlyFans, they have management companies. And so you're not talking to the porn star, the OnlyFan model. You're actually talking to some old man that is running their management company. Like, and so you think it's OnlyFans gives the illusion of a relationship, but all of these women have people that run their pages for them. So you're like, you got to I want to just debunk that lie, because hopefully that can help somebody that feels like, oh, I have a connection with this woman. What's so sad is I get so many emails from people. There's a lot of scamming going on the internet. And so people will create accounts and they'll pretend to be porn stars, and they'll reach out to men that are following that porn star. So say, let's just use Lisa Ann, because she's, and I know this happens to her all the time, but she has her page, somebody creates another page, and then they go and check out all her followers and start following them from the separate account, and they say, hey, this is my other account, please don't tell anybody about it, but I'm really struggling financially, I was wondering if there's any way you can help me out. And so these people think, oh my goodness, my favorite porn star is reaching out to me, of course I'll send you money. And then they'll also pretend like, I'm really lonely and I'm looking for a husband and I think you're really hot. And they feed them all these lies. And I have men reaching out to me saying, yeah, so and so, whatever their porn star's name is going to be flying out. We're getting married. And I'm like, how much money did you send her? Oh, well, I sent her money for her plane ticket. And I'm like, you're getting scammed, so I think that men are really chasing, like they do feel lonely. Another thing that I found out about recently that was like my jaw was to the floor is on Discord. They have groups where you can watch porn together, and they have masturbation like parties, like, hey guys, I'm gonna air my favorite movie at 3 p.m, let's all join. That's how desperate people are, like, the in for community. That's how lonely people are, like, they join people to have masturbation parties.
Right. Oh,
It's so sad.
that is really, really sad. And I honestly, I'm a pretty optimistic person, but I don't see this getting any better anytime soon. Just given the nature of technology and the accessibility, and again, like like how many people are just struggling with their mental health and lacking connection, and again, how easy it is to access some of the things, combined with the fact that, like, I think with addiction, I heard something fairly recently that really, really struck my attention, that you have to like find a better alternative when you're beating addiction. Like, okay, like with things like porn, OnlyFans, like, okay, like I don't have to go out and meet women. I can find a woman that I'm very attracted to. I can get attention from her. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to spend a whole lot of money. I know that I'm not gonna run into any kind of like relationship issues. Like, how do I find something that's better than that? Right? It's like we know that the alternative is much better, like having a healthy relationship and putting yourself out there and dealing with rejection and putting the work in. But when you're in the thick of like addiction to things like that and you feel like crap about yourself, like the idea of giving that crutch up and having to go to the wild wild west of dating in 2024 seems so scary. As somebody who's been in recovery for, going almost 16 years from drugs, like I remember one of the hardest things about giving up drugs was, how do I deal with life at a point where I feel like complete garbage about myself, and now I've given up this coping mechanism that has helped me for years, right? So like, how, I mean, I know faith in God is a big part of your story. It's part of my story as well, but outside of that, how do we get out of this?
Yeah, I think finding yourself a better community. I think that like going and serving and giving back, like whether you go and serve the homeless, like do things that make your soul feel good because when we're just like chasing porn and drugs, we're just trying to make like our flesh feel good, but like we have a soul too. Like we have to do things that genuinely make us feel good. It feels good to serve other people. It feels good to encourage someone, to help a friend in need. I remember when I was going through something, I had lost my job and I felt like I had no hope for a new, like I was just like, I don't have any money saved. I don't know what's going to happen. This was after I left porn. And my friend told me, here's what you need to do. You need to go and call 3 people and encourage them. And I'm like, but I'm going through it. And it doesn't matter. Go encourage 3 people. So I called 3 different women and I just like, hey, how's it going? And, they start pouring out their hearts and I encouraged 3 people. And after that, I felt so much better. And so sometimes like we magnify our problems because we focus on our problems so much and we're selfish. And when we just focus on ourselves and we don't focus on anyone else, like it doesn't make your soul happy. And so then you want to run to things like porn, but porn is just an escape, but it's never going to lead you to freedom.
But like outside of that, I guess when you're in those super low moments, have you found anything to be useful for you to help like improve your self confidence and self esteem when your life just seems like a mess and you're feeling lonely?
I mean, all of mine, you said besides God, let me tell you. Worship music, singing my heart out to God with the headphones in and just like literally singing and praying and reading my Bible. I just really try to read things and like I have Kindle books on my phone. So after I put my baby to bed, I just sit there and I read. Like I'm a reader. I love to read things that make my soul feel good and that's what I do. And that's really what's been helpful and having good friends in your life. Sometimes, like when you feel like you have no hope, you have to pull on somebody that has hope for you, and you have to receive their hope and their faith for your life.
I guess for people who aren't Christians and they're not believers in God, you talk about how much God and worship music has helped you. And I think the people who haven't experienced that, they think the idea that is kind of crazy, right? Like how could that really help heal all of your wounds, all your past traumas, help you improve your self esteem? How do you explain that to somebody who's not a Christian?
I mean, I really believe God to be the healer, and I believe that you can put as much energy into fear and you can create your fears or you can create your insecurities. But if you shift that energy and you start to put your faith in God, it's like you meet the very one that can heal your soul. And so, like, rather than me sitting and worrying and going, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get through this. This is so hard. Like, I hate my life. Like, I can speak all that out, but does it make me feel any better? No, it makes me feel worse. Now, if I change that into, you know what? I believe that God's going to get me through this. I believe that He's working all things together for my good. I believe that my future is in His hands and that He is a good God and He's directing my steps. Like, just speaking that makes my soul feel better, and speaking those kinds of words and like connecting with God, like he's our creator. Not only did He create us, He has the power to heal us. And what I love about God's restoration is that if you do give Him a chance and if you do start seeking Him, I have known Him to be the God that restores you back to a place before you ever even knew what it was like to be broken. If you can think back to a time when you were maybe 4 or 5 years old and you were so happy, full of joy, full of faith, full of love, before life robbed that from you, before people rejected you, abused you, stepped on you, like God wants to take you back to that place. And how does it help? I mean, you're connecting with Him. So it's like, my husband, when we first met, he was a junk food junkie. Like, all he ever wanted was to eat was Taco Bell and Carl's Jr. And me, on the other hand, I cook and I cook good, clean, healthy food. The first time I fed him chicken and quinoa, he's like, "What is this? Is this bird food?" And I'm like, "No, that's not bird food. That is quinoa." He had never had it before. But as we, are together a little longer, we were married, and he's like, "Gabe, love," he calls me one day, "Can you make us a salad? I kind of had a bad lunch." And I'm like, "Who are you that you are requesting a salad?" But it's because the more time that he spent with me and the more time that he spent eating healthy foods, he realized that he actually felt so much better eating healthy foods than he did junk food. And the same is true for us, is that if we could just take the step of faith and spend time with God, like, we start to realize, hey, spending time like reading my Bible, like, it's not actually as bad as everybody else says it is. It actually makes me feel really good that now I'm craving more of that. I'm craving more of this type of music over this type of music because I notice the way that it makes me feel and it's changing me from the inside out.
If somebody's listening to this and like, all right, like I'm hearing what Brittany's saying, I'm kind of feeling like I want to maybe give like some form of spirituality a try, but I don't want to dive like head first into it. What's like a good like entry? It's like the person who like hasn't exercised in like 20 years. It's like you wouldn't tell them to go to the gym 5 days a week. You'd be like, all right, just go outside and go for a 5 minute walk. What is that version when it comes to God and Christianity?
Yeah, so for me, I mean, I remember when I first started, like, my nana would send me prayers that she would print out for me, and she would send them because I didn't even know how to pray. Like, I was never a Christian growing up. And those prayers were really helpful. I would just sit on my knees and I would just read the prayer. It was like, "God bless me that I may be a blessing to others. Strengthen me so that I could help the weak." Like, it was very like, they were good prayers, but they were a little generic. But that was my entry point, really, beyond like going to church, which was really helpful as well. But you can just Google like prayers, for whatever you're going through. Maybe you have anxiety and you're looking for peace. Google a prayer for anxiety. Maybe you're overwhelmed and stressed out and burdened. Look up prayers for that, and they're just guided prayers. You can just read them, and just read them every day. I remember, like, I'd read it every day, and then all of a sudden I started to have my own words to add to the prayers. So I think that prayer is a wonderful way to build your spiritual life up. And so I would start there.
Well, Brittany, this has been awesome. I wanted to thank you so much for coming on here and being so vulnerable and just sharing your story and just being so open minded to talk about the various subjects that we've covered. If people want to learn more about your ministry, what you're doing, if they want to connect with you on social media, if they want to listen to your podcast, where's the best place to do that?
So our website is lovealwaysministries.com, and everything is on there. All of the social media accounts, YouTubes, and everything that we have is on that page.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on here. I think the audience is going to really enjoy hearing your perspective, your story, and then the different topics that we covered today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It was great talking to you.
Likewise. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, I really think you're going to like this video as well. I'll see you there.